if you want to simplify your sales message so people actually get what you're up to, if you've got a complex offering it's hard to explain, here's a couple of very simple tricks that you can use to reach understanding much quicker so your buyers can actually understand your offering and they can then move on to buying it from you. The first one is something called equivalence. Now, equivalence is where you take something people understand, you take something people don't quite understand, and we just transpose those two things across. So if I said to you that I'm going to start a new company, it's going to be a barbershop, but it's going to be a bit like Uber. Barbershop, but a bit like Uber. In your head, you're imagining vans with barber chairs in, driving around, an app where you can book them, etc. So we take the characteristics of Uber, the characteristics of a barbershop, and we splice those two things together. That's equivalence. So if people are finding it hard to understand the nature of your offering, what is it like? Now, whilst I've just used an example there with a brand name company, obviously I don't suggest you do that because you'll be promoting the competition, but it's a bit like an Apple. It's a bit like tying your shoelaces, or it's a bit like making a payment at the bank, whatever it happens to be. But what is your offering, your solution like that your buyer would already understand? It could be a behavior they already understand, a decision they're already making, or just how to use something. But we're using existing behavior, existing decision making, and then we're transposing that on new behavior, new unknown things to them. That's equivalence. Second one, and yes, I know this is seemingly obvious, but it's very important, is to use basic language. So the posh term for the explain your offering to a child thing is called the Feynman technique. And if you imagine that you're dealing with a child, perhaps 8, 9, 10 years of age, something like that, where they've got a good command of English, how would you explain it to them? And I take this a step further. So a couple of things for me. Syllables are expensive, so the fewer syllables you can use, the better. Explanations are expensive. So again, if you can name things, if you can use equivalence, any other kind of articulation to simplify things down, that's definitely going to help you. But I also think when you're explaining something to a child, you're more forgiving, aren't you? So you would explain, you would say, oh, this is something from Amazon.com, and Amazon is that big shop on the internet, isn't it? So you take the time, you give them the benefit of the doubt, and you'd be more patient. And I think that's part of the Feynman technique that we kind of miss out on here. So we're just thinking about just use simpler words and it's fine, anybody can understand it. Yeah, I get that. But maybe also, if you're communicating with people, it's just that thing of giving them the benefit of the doubt and just being patient with them, and they're going to have questions, and that's okay, and taking the time to explain things. That's definitely going to help speed up the process. Now, you need to avoid assumption. Don't just assume that people know things or do things. One of the biggest challenges I get when clients come to me is, oh, we're dealing with board level C-suite executives, so they should know that. That's fine. They should know that language. And my pushback to them is always, well, they should, but do they? Because it's a bit of a gamble if they don't. So let's take the time to break it down, particularly with things like jargon, and most definitely with things like acronyms and abbreviations. So I will always, I say always, most of the time, but even if I use a term like B2B, I'll take a second to then say, that's business to B2B, business to business. I'll explain it. Because if I just use B2B on its own, you might know what that is, and I've lost you. Or you go off and Google it and come back to YouTube. If I use a different way of saying it, business to business, I mean, it's not the end of the world in this example, but if I use a different way of explaining it, makes things a bit more long-winded. But if I use B2B and then I explain it as well, I've covered my bases. I've demonstrated I understand you because I'm using your jargon and your abbreviations, but I'm also explaining it for the people that don't quite know. And I've never come across anybody that's been upset because I've explained an abbreviation or a piece of jargon to them, but I've definitely been in situations where I've used a piece of jargon or an abbreviation and I've lost the person because they don't have the foggiest clue about what I'm doing for them. So simplifying the communication of your offering really comes down to explaining things to children, right? Simplifying it down, fewer syllables, simplifying it down, having fewer syllables, being more patient with people, giving them the benefit, so literally treating them like they're children, giving them the benefit of the doubt. And a real important one here is the explaining acronyms, jargon, and abbreviation, because you might think you're clever in using that terminology, but ultimately it might cost you the sale.